And we are live, round two. Yeah, so last time I tried to go live, we were suspended from YouTube for a bit, so we weren't able to. And we were trying to use a backup platform, Unite, but it wasn't working. So here we are again, which is better because it can go straight to YouTube this time. So
Cool.
Before we start real quick, I want to give a couple announcements. So June 20th, for everyone tuning in, that's when the end of COVID launches. And I'll have in the show notes my episode on Luke Story's podcast for people to watch to explain what the end of COVID is about. But I know we're tired of hearing all this stuff, and the majority of my audience already knows what's up with respect to COVID and gain of function and things like this. But for the majority of the so-called alternative community, a lot of people are still latching on to some things that are not entirely true that actually allow this to, go on into the future with new so-called pandemics. I mean, we already hear Bill Gates talking about 2025 and such. So that's the purpose of the end of COVID. It gets down to the granular details covering everything that happened the last 3 years and beyond. So please stay tuned for that. And we actually have an affiliate program that we're opening up to literally anyone. So if you want to be an affiliate to help us raise awareness for the end of COVID and make some money off of helping us raise awareness, you can sign up for that via the show notes as well. Trying to get this out to as many people as possible, because in order to ensure this nonsense does not happen again, we need to be fully informed. So with that, I'm excited for this conversation. So to give some context, we met through a mutual friend, Kayla Hull, and Kylie started working with you to help resolve some of her trauma. And she has been raving on and on and on about it. And some of the stuff she's been talking about sounds really cool. I'm also, if my face looks red, everyone, it's because I'm sweaty as hell still. I went on a run.
Because you put in that work. That work.
I went on a run like 45 minutes ago, and I'm like still sweating despite showering. So that's fun. But nice. I'm actually going to turn this fan on just a little bit. But yeah, I'm really pumped for this conversation because as someone who's gone through a lot of childhood trauma myself, I'm really looking forward to working with you here in the next few months. But this is something that fascinates me, and I haven't done many podcast episodes touching on this topic. So it's an important one because I've come to the position that unresolved emotions or suppressed emotions, unresolved trauma, et cetera, is the largest factor that leads to what we call disease symptoms. So with that, let's start with your background. Can you just give me your backstory that led you to start doing the work that you do with high vibe healing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest thing, and I have to agree with you specifically on the catalyst towards disease. Like, that's the biggest thing. But for me, it started in high school. I was 17 years old at the time. And I remember going into my senior year, I was asked, like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do with your life? Kind of that preemptive aspect of what's the next phase in life. And I remember sitting in class, and I was like, the only thing that I could think of was I want to be infinitely interested. And like, that is a large craving, right? Like, that is a massive endeavor in itself. And a part of me started to realize, well, what is infinite and what is always interesting? And that was energy, like energy as a whole. So I started, essentially by breaking myself down. I was really, really into sports. I was a D1, D2 recruit going out of high school into baseball. And I just got caught up in drugs. That kind of cured this pathway towards healing. And it started just by breaking this whole thing open with my brother, right? So I went to school specifically to play baseball for a little bit of time. And then my brother got sick, like really, really sick. So I decided to drop out of college and then just move to LA. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm 20 years old. And I'm in the midst of a full-fledged drug addiction, a substance abuse problem that I can't get out of. He had stage 4 kidney failure. He had to end up getting two transplants. So for me, I went out to help take care of him, and I saw what health was from the basis. And I was like, nutrition is my ticket, right? But I was like, where is nutrition? I was obsessed.
How did you start discovering that, though? Because, of course, growing up in Western societies, the overwhelming majority of us are conditioned into the allopathic medical paradigm. So like what tipped you off to start looking into nutrition?
I think it was just because of the situations, how many times he had to go to the hospital. And like, it was just cringeworthy to go to the hospital as many times as we did. And then also at the same time, my mom, had 4 degenerative conditions. And then my dad had ulcerative colitis. So I was just like, this is a perfect example for what I don't want in my life. And where does it start? Like, in LA is a melting pot for everything that you can think of when it comes down to any form of healing. But nutrition was just like, this makes sense, right? Like, if this is our fuel, this has got to be the start. And I was like, well, where's the origin of where this food comes from? And then the soil came in, and I was like, yo, here it comes.
Where were you finding all these resources though? Because like people, unless I'll put it this way, the majority of people that I know, unless they have someone tip them off to the fraud of allopathic medicine and the fraud of our food systems and the industrial agriculture system, like how did you, who exposed you to this knowledge?
Honestly, man, the first person that exposed me was Dr. Mercola. Like that's where like everything started. And for me, then my mind, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this kind of characteristics, I'm obsessed with learning. Like, but for me, it's the origin. Like the origin, the root. And I was like, if it's the root, let's go to the roots. Like, what is more important than the roots in the soil? Yeah. Right there it is. And that's what started this whole thing. And then I was like, yo, I had a buddy, very good friend of mine, was just like, yo, man, I'm going to this permaculture conference in Temecula, California. And I was like, yo, let's do it. Like, I want to understand what are we doing here? Like, why are these principles of regenerative components to agriculture so important to us, not only just in our health, but also just as community in general? And that's where it all tipped off. That's where nutrition got to start. And then I worked in a few like health restaurants, worked in a couple of juice bars and managed that. And I was just like, I just started to get this idea in my head. I was like, this is what's going to be the tipping point for me. But I knew in my soul, especially when I was 24, 25, that it wasn't just going to be nutrition. Like, there's more to it than this. But that's where it all started.
Okay. And then so from there, starting to explore nutrition, regenerative agriculture, you were like you worked as a farmer for a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In Hawaii.
Farm?
Yeah.
In Hawaii.
It was beautiful.
Okay.
It was beautiful. It was hard.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So like, it seems that you really went full bore on this like permaculture, regenerative agriculture side of things. Really.
Yeah. Well, it had to we can kind of like trace this back a little bit because it gets a little like hop, skip, and a jump specifically on this timeline. But like 2016 really hit, and I had a relapse specifically within my drug addiction. And I called it the great relapse of 2016. And it was really, really tough for me to understand, well, this nutrition aspect is not going to be enough. Like, what else am I going to see? Right. And then I came across bioenergetics, correlated that to regenerative agriculture, but then I also missed the emotional side. I was like, whoa.
What is bioenergetics?
Bioenergetics has a twofold definition. By my perspective, by my see of it, is just how you study energy and how much it flows through the system. Okay. And then also how the emotions themselves actually affect us as the whole in the system. And then we can trickle into holonomics, which is really, really fascinating. But 2016 was like, I got to go. I got a call in January of 2017. My dad was sick, and I was like, I'm starting to lose this whole notion of what it means to be alive, right? Because drugs aren't going to, like, doing what I was doing. I was kind of in this weird spot where I was like, I know that I'm going to be initiated by a ridiculous amount of pain. And I was like, okay, like, I have these skills. I started my practice in September of 2016. And then I went back home to Minneapolis, Minnesota to help out my dad and my mom, who was going through major surgeries. And I was like, this is a perfect time for me to figure out who I am. Like, who is this person, right? Who is this machine of systems, right? And then also, like, how can I help my family, right? I'm just very, very, very diligent on my family. So it started this notion of 3 years of concrete work, like foundational work, helping out my parents where I could, the best that I could, but also just stripping all of this. And then, I got that opportunity with, the world, in 2020, just like, showing its teeth in a sense. And I was just like, yo, I can now go. Like, my dad was like, I got this. We're good health wise. And I was like, all right, I want to go back to my original passion. And that's to go farm. So I went all over the country. I was farming in different places and ended up in Hawaii for a short bit amount of time. And then I was just like, yo, I'm really starting to understand what energy is as a whole. Because then I started to see how people congregate around agriculture and how community is truly built. And that's one of the biggest foundations. One of the main communications is food. But I was like, there's still something more, right? And that notion of psychoneuroimmunology, bioenergetics, and just thought always crossed my mind. How do I put all these together? And
So
that's
it's like
just
the food was the catalyst, given the context that you
Yeah.
were, I don't want to speak for you, but likely suppressing some of your own emotional trauma. And so the food was the catalyst in a weird way for you to look into energy, and looking into energy, you then started to realize how much our emotions, and for you, your suppressed emotions and unhealed trauma were impacting your health.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
So what did you explore at first?
Are you talking about like technique wise or thought process?
I guess what I'm asking is, how did you get to the point of doing what you do now with high vibe healing? And then we'll start with some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I love systems, right? Like systems,
I'm
like
a systems engineer. So
there you go, bro. There you go. Yeah. And it's fun too. And I learned that from audio engineering school. Cause that's when I went out to California while I was helping out my brother as best as I could, I went to school for audio engineering. So it's just like, I love systems, and systems in the highest definition is dynamics, right? So that's what we teach at High Vibe Healing, is conscious and subconscious dynamics. So how do you break down these systems? Well, if you have a physical system, you have an emotional system, a mental and intellectual system, a social relationship system, you have a spiritual system, an occupational system, which is also into the financial, and then you have your environment, which is the main system of where your senses come from. I was like, you got to do the whole thing. And that's what holonomics means in its entirety. It means the entire framework. It's just, you can't just do the physical. You can't just do the nutrition. I mean, you can get so far, but for me, from my experience, from my research and my application to life, that was the catalyst, was food. But I was like, we got to take care of the whole. And the intellectual and emotional aspect is the psychological aspect. And that's when we get into the psychosomatic aspect of everything in this world, that notion, that esoteric principle that the universe is mental. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And the mind creates the body, both like on the individual level, but the universal mind is what creates this entire reality. So doing what you do with high vibe healing, who are some of the teachers that you learned from to start incorporating their work and come to your own, I guess, method of healing trauma?
Yeah. Wow. That's a loaded question, because there's a lot. When you go through so much research, you go to different retreats, different conferences. I mean, you have the big like heavy hitters like Bruce Lipton, the Dr. Joe Dispenzas. I mean, like, I think I went through Dr. Joe Dispenza's books, like all of his books, at least 3 times, because it's just like, it's fascinating, the knowledge and the science behind that unification for people to understand like how potent your thought process is very, very important to me. Trauma came from Pat Ogden, a lot of Bessel van der Kolk, and then the biggest one, Brent Baum, was an influence in me understanding the holographic principle to this entire universe, and how we imprint things through a holonomic charge, which is just called our emotions from a negative standpoint. So those are like the biggest ones. But I mean, Dr. Bradley Nelson was huge, the developer of the body code and the emotion code. Key indicator of how to just release emotions from the fascial tissue. But for me, I wanted to go deeper. Like, I wanted to go deeper. I was like, it's not just the emotions, it's got to be the programming. The programming begets from the trauma itself.
Yeah, we're throwing out a lot of words, and I want to get to all of these people like holonomics and like psychosomatic and things like this. So what is holonomics for the people that are watching who may not know what it is?
So holonomic in its essence, in neuroscience and also Greek, means the entire framework, the whole. So if we look at even Sanskrit, old school cultures, and if you do any type of like vibrational research when it comes down to frequency, the highest frequency known to mankind is wholeness. So that notion, I was like, I want that. Like, I want that. So if wholeness in its essence means holonomic, we're putting that into our framework.
So what is it in application though? Like what does applying holonomics look like?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of folds to it. Holonomics is more so like a math sequence. It's more in the mathematic aspect, but how we do it on the healing aspect is we go through those 7 dynamics. So if we take care of each system at its whole, then we have the entire thing taken care of. We're not missing any piece.
What are those 7 systems?
Yeah, the 7 dynamics. I think I just listed them off a little bit earlier, but you have the physical aspect.
Okay.
Yep. We call those
same again though. Same again.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're called the 7 dynamics of health. We have the physical, we have the mental, which is also intellectual. We have the emotional, We also have the social, which is also in cohesive with your relationships. You have your environmental, you have your occupational and financial, and then obviously, and you have the spiritual aspect
Got
as
it.
too. So then you take care of the seven. Seven is the number of completeness, and it's also the number of taking your power back.
Mhm.
So when you understand the assigned meaning behind all these systems, you have a whole system for healing.
So with you, relative to other so-called like natural practitioners or even like trauma healing specific practitioners, what of those seven dynamics do you think most people are missing, and what are most practitioners missing?
Wow, that is a great question.
Yeah,
Honestly,
well,
I think,
the reason I asked that is because
yeah,
your Kylie has talked so much about, and it sounds so different. Kylie's talked so much about how your framework and your approach is so different than other people we've come across, because we've been
yeah,
in the natural health space loosely for the last 7, almost 8 years now. So
yeah,
like we've seen it all, so to speak. So
yeah.
when we see something that is so
You're well
drastically
researched.
different, yeah, when we see something that's so
Yeah.
drastically different, it's like, okay, what is different about this?
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, for me, the most important thing from the mental perspective or the mental dynamic would be environment, because
Mm,
the environment associates, like it's the law of association, our entire existence from our senses. So if we have the association in our environment, that's how we start to pre-program or expel or express our programming. So environmental is probably the most important when it comes down to the human aspect. Spiritual, if you're in that alignment, is probably most important because you really want to curtail most of your life towards animism, from my perspective.
what's that?
How animism is the closest thing before we start to get to separatism. And
Oh, okay.
animism is just how I was taught, specifically from indigenous cultures, of how to utilize everything from the land, how to utilize spirit so it
Got it.
animates
Okay.
through you. And for me, those two probably are the most underrated, but the most important, but obviously mental and emotional. Because if you think about it this way, every single thing that we do is for an emotional payoff.
Mhm.
Every single thing that we do. So the end product of every single experience has to be some form of emotion feeling. You know,
Mhm.
it has to be something that comes from that. But I think the most underrated that are most important to me for other people to understand is the environment, because the environment indoctrinates 95 to 99.994% of your entire awareness. And that's all subconscious because that's where your senses are. Your senses are subcortical.
And so when we're talking about our environment, specifically as it pertains to suppressed emotions or unhealed trauma, are you speaking specifically to how our environment is what brings about those patterns in us that we need to look at?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the signal,
Yeah.
right? So, like, what has ever happened in childhood, especially from 0 to 2, 2 to 6,
Mhm.
6 to 18, 18 to 27? Like, you get to start to see these cycles, and then the environment is going to signal the trigger. And the trigger is just the programming that you have got from your environment, right? You have adverse childhood relationship experiences, how you were developed specifically with your parents or a pastor, or a daycare provider. You have adverse life experiences as just a whole, what's happening specifically throughout your life and what's getting triggered from that aspect. The triggering point is coming from the environment
Mhm.
always. And whether that's intracellular or external, because you have an intracellular environment as well. And
You
then you
know,
start getting to epigenetics and whatnot.
it's so interesting though, because I always think about this with respect to trauma and being triggered because of something in our environment reminding us on either on a conscious level or a subconscious level about our past, something that we've not healed or addressed completely, is that in most cases that thing that is triggering us is not exactly like what happened to us. It's just a small piece of it, and
Yeah.
that thing that happened to us is no longer happening to us right now. So the only thing perpetuating our suffering is our story surrounding it. And like,
Yeah.
I'm saying that on a conscious level because that shit still happens to me all the time. Like, where I get triggered by something, that like a slight reminder about something way in my past that is no longer occurring right here, right now, but it's
Yeah.
still affecting me profoundly.
Yeah. And I would totally add to that notion of that mental story or that mental narrative is the expectation that you're putting out into the environment too, that you're projecting out into the environment of yourself and other people around you. So the environment
like
itself.
you mean by like attracting it, right? Like you're
Totally.
attracting. Yeah.
Totally. Because I believe the foundation of suffering literally comes from expectation. And then when you couple that specifically with the mental story and that entrapment that you have from that traumatic experience, like, yo, that's a 1-2 punch. It's a 1-2 punch of being frozen in yourself. And everybody who's had that experience knows how much it sucks.
So how do we begin to address that? Like, what do you do? What does high vibe healing do that's different to address that and not do what a lot of people and practitioners and healing modalities in the healing community do, just continually put a Band-Aid on it and perpetuate it or suppress the symptoms associated with that problem?
Yeah. Well, my biggest thing is to make sure that anybody coming into, our facilitation does not get diagnosed with a woo-woo flu, right? We want to make sure that you are educated.
What's a woo-woo flu?
You know what I mean? Where you're not caught into that new age, this kind of airy fairy aspect. Like we want you to.
That's what I thought you meant. I just I've never heard woo-woo flu. I love that.
Yeah. It's just like one of these things where we have to understand where your systems are. Because we go through everything. So when people come into a consultations, for instance, one, we want to know you, right? And we want to know you so we can serve you better. So we want to go through each aspect of these systems to see where you're ailing, and then also how this corroborates specifically to your neurology. Because your neurology will speak to you constantly. Anybody listening to this has had this experience where you're about to go do something and there's that resistance. That's a program telling you that you aren't capable, you aren't worthy, you aren't valued, you aren't appreciated for what you're doing. You're not good enough. You're a mistake. You're a failure. So we want to see exactly what your desire is. And then do you have a level of devotion? Because the world's going to throw shit at you. You're going to make a commitment and then the world's going to be like, all right, cool. Are you serious? Are you serious? Because we take this not only lightheartedly, but we also take it seriously at the same time because they're in this world of dualism. Yeah. Right. So it's just like you have to be able to appreciate that. But when people come in, we take a 30,000 bird's eye view. What does your systems look like? What are you committed to? What are your metrics so we know how to best serve you? And then what do you really truly desire out of your life? And I would say 80% of the people that come in, they just have no idea. They're hurting. Yeah, they're hurting.
They have no way to look at, like, from a present still perspective on what their actual desire is, because they're constantly in a either disassociative state or they're constantly looking at the past or the future.
Yeah, or looking just outside of themselves, specifically from society's conditioning, right? They're looking at somebody to tell them what to do so they can feel like they belong. Right? That's the hardest part, especially when you get lost in the external world. You have no sense of self, and self in its essence isn't your identity. It's not your name. It's not your title. It's not what you do for a living. It's not you being mom or dad. Yep. It's you spiritually and being like, okay, well, if I understand that process, like I can surrender. Being like, I'm okay with not knowing. And then we chime in and we're just like, hey, all right, where would you like to go? And then we will implement a specific strategy and a structure and a discipline and a devotion for you. And then we just run it. And then we have a lot of fun doing this, man, because a lot of people are scared to face themselves for what has happened that is not even theirs, man. When we start getting into adverse multi-generational experiences, you start to realize that 95% of most of your stuff that you carry isn't even yours. It's not even
from your parents and
your lineage,
parents, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And from the research that I found, and don't quote me on this, is just from my research, but I found up to 14 generations can be harbored specifically into the nervous system. But I've done sessions with people where we've gone back 26, 52 generations. So it's like the thing is about eternal time, which is all subconscious. Our consciousness is non-local, man. We can go anywhere at any time if we really wanted to.
How do we begin to address that, though, for whether it's intergenerational or not, or it's something that you experienced when you were growing up, or even something you experienced in like a week ago? How do you begin to address that trauma with your approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. The one thing that I always tell people, especially when they come into this facilitation, is be okay with the fact that you've been lied to your entire life. Start over. And if you're willing to start over, we will do our damnedest to give you a foundation that you can build upon. Because once you can build from that healing phase, then you can expand within your energy, and then there's more creative potential. And then you can collaborate, and then you can cooperate with people, and that's what community really is, because we're not meant to be isolated. Isolation in nature doesn't exist. Like if you look at a cell and it's isolated from the other cell, that's what starts the cancerous aspect specifically within our being, right? We're meant to constantly be doing this. Like what we're doing right now should be happening all the time, right? It should be happening all the time.
Person, not on Zoom, but yeah.
Right, totally. Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah, we should be breaking bread, having amazing food, having the best beverages, all these things on a consistent basis. But our society is so fractured, and especially right now, so divided by so many different narratives that really at the end of the day don't matter.
No,
they don't matter. It's like, what are you truly doing to connect with people? And I think what we really do well here is we create a family environment first, and then we focus on the individual. So their entire like micro and macro units can be affected properly.
Yeah. What does that look like more specifically though? Like someone that comes to you and has, like, they grew up in an abusive household, right?
Sure.
And they're still suffering with that right now. How do you begin to address that?
Honestly, yeah, absolutely. It's just the trust factor, because you need to have that deep intimacy within that facilitation, and you have to ask specific psychosomatic questions to their nervous system to bypass their identity with their associated problems.
How do you do that? How do you get past their identity to their...
To be honest with you, man, it is a skill that I've just been given to, so I can speak on that. But because it's about transparency and integrity here. It's just something about my essence makes people just trust that fact because of my story as well. But I think that's huge about storytelling, is I tell a lot of people specifically about what I've been through, what I've had to endure, and that gives them that safety. Like they just break open. They're just like, whew, I can let the ice melt a little bit. And then you just ask the proper questions, because you want to make sure that people are okay and safe and they're not re-triggered. But also at the same time, we have a screening process, man, because we have to be able to make sure that, are you in a place where you can actually do this? Because if you're not, we do have resources where we can actually suggest people that, are more inclined to be able to work with people with more severity issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But so Kylie always comes out of her what she calls subconscious sessions with you, and it's like, whoa, that was crazy. So what is that? Like, what is... I guess I'm trying to get to like the specifics of like what happens.
Man.
What happens in a subconscious session to uproot some of these subconscious programs.
Yeah, we call it track and trace and reconfigure.
Okay.
So basically we're asking psychosomatic questions to be able to bypass the identity and the analytical mind to get to the mainframe, because the subconscious has three main functions. It records every single thing that's happening in your life. It processes what's happening, things from the emotions, because that's the limbic system. And then it projects everything onto the screen of space. Because if you ever realize that if you're feeling something and you're feeling it immensely, it keeps showing up in your environment. It's magic, right? It's just like if you're feeling more stressed, feeling more tense, you're going to get more, because it's just going to keep showing up. Right? See, and that's the beauty of it, because we track and trace just the imprint, and then we talk to the neurology. We're not actually talking specifically to Alec. We're not specifically talking to Kylie. We're not specifically talking to Kyle. We're bypassing that by putting somebody in a parasympathetic dominance by just asking simple questions and guiding them to that sequence. And then when you get to the memory, then we're like, yo, let's reconfigure the holonomic charge, which is the negative imprint of that energy
associated with that memory.
100%. It's very simple, very gentle. You don't have to relive any aspect of the traumatic memory, because mostly what is beautiful that I found within this practicum is that you think, right? A lot of people think they know what happened to them, but then when we talk to the neurology, which has recorded every single part of your life, every single detail, it kicks out a different story that you had no idea. And then we get into adverse non-declarative experiences, which is 0.006 to 5% of your conscious awareness. That's why we can barely even remember anything that's happened in our life. And most of the things, there's studies coming out and have come out that show that we make up details about memories that we've had in the past to make ourselves feel better about how shitty we feel. It's insane how much we entrap ourselves. So that's why we can't talk to Alec. We can, but Alec's going to get in the way with his rational mind and come up with some story and be like, oh, well, I don't trust Kyle in his facilitation.
Well, I can give an example of that with myself. So I, about a year ago, my friend Andrew Genovese does this thing called dimensional breath work, where he takes people through like a 2-hour breathwork session. Ooh, and it's
intense.
I've never done ayahuasca, but there were several people who were there in the room who have done ayahuasca, and basically every one of them was like, that felt like an ayahuasca ceremony. Like the state of mind that I was in felt very similar. And we were told what it would be like prior to doing the session. So I started coming up with all these stories in my mind of what I would have to face. Like, oh, I
Right.
bet I'm going to have to face this, the mistakes I made previously with my relationship with Kylie, because we've been together since we were 16 and I was a shitty boyfriend at first. I bet I'm going to have to face that and all these other things. And then when I got in deep into that breathwork session, it was like a memory from when I was like 10 years old, where I was watching my parents just scream at each other, and I stepped in and I had to like I felt like I had the burden of holding the family
Yeah.
together. And that's what came up rather than this. And it was like, it made me realize that a lot of those situations were just stacked on top of that initial feeling. And that probably wasn't even the initial one. That was probably like a
Right.
few layers up from the initial one. So I
Yeah.
know that's one of the things that you do with high vibe healing is it's not even necessarily about addressing the recent trauma. It's about addressing the original wound that then led you to attract more situations like that into your life. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the imprint, right? So it's literally the imprint. So for instance, when we get in, and I love what you're saying about that, because that notion that when you are 10 years old and you're in that situation, that's called an adverse childhood relationship experiences, because you're starting to see the dependence specifically of what you're seeing in the environment with your parents. And so now there's quantify, you can measure these things. Now you can start to understand, what do we need to focus on? And to track the imprint, we're just asking the question. So if you feel like we go to a place where you're 12 years old, right? Something happens, you're playing baseball, you tear up your knee, just perfect example, right? And then there's a lot of emotions. It's a high emotional impact experience. So it starts to indoctrinate the neurology within this program, like, oh, this hurts, or I'm not good enough, or anything else that's triggered before 12 years old. Then when we get to that specific, we ask the question, is that the first time you actually felt that? And then guess what? The neurology that has known every single part of your being will tell you no or yes. And if it's a no, then guess what? We go through the retracing, retracking, and reconfigure process. And my goal is to get close to zero as possible, because there's more neurological matrix being developed from the ages of 0 to 2 than any other time you're on this planet, because you're in complete delta. That's why a baby itself has a hard time staying awake for more than 7 minutes at a time, is because you're in that deep regenerative rest, and you cannot neurologically rewire until you're resting. Right? That deep rest. So now, closer to zero, the longer you've had that imprint in the body, the more we get to strip from the neurology. And then you're going to have the body cascade. You're going to be like, whoa, I feel either really, really good, or I feel really, really tired. And then it's just about rest and regeneration. Like, this is all built on regenerative and interdependent principles, because if we're not regenerating, I feel like we're just decaying. And we're seeing that everywhere. Chronic illness is not getting, it's not getting smaller. You know, it's not diminishing. And then
54% of kids today have at least one chronic condition.
It's insane.
It's
insane.
nuts. Yeah.
And for me, I firmly believe that, the original components of our disease are psychosomatic in nature. It's how
Absolutely.
the thoughts imprint on the body, which I firmly believe the body is subconscious, Yeah. And that's huge.
I just had an epiphany, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm not. So I'm going to try to articulate this as best I can. The reason so many trauma healing modalities fail is because, let me preface this by saying that every single day, especially in the times we're living in now, we're faced with things that are going to trigger us and cause, whether micro or macro traumas, if you want to call them that. They're going to trigger us in their traumatic situations, especially the last 3 years, right?
For sure.
But the reason so many trauma healing modalities fail is because it's a perpetual ripping off of the Band-Aid, because what you're doing is you're having to face all of those little traumatic instances that you experienced over the past God knows how long, instead of getting to the root, which is the imprint, ripping up the imprint, the initial trauma that led you to then be triggered by those situations into the future. If you rip up that imprint, then there's no need to address every little traumatic instance that you experienced, because the imprint is no longer there for you to be triggered as badly by those types of experiences again.
Yeah, that's perfect. And for me, the only thing that I add on is just the analogy aspects. I work with kids, and kids love analogies. Like, they love to learn in analogies. And what you're saying, the root, like, think of it, we call it the trauma forest, right? So you have this notion of the new age and all these other people calling limiting beliefs. All the research that I've done from really high-end professionals, there's no such thing as a limiting belief. You have a core belief, which is rooted in your nervous system, and then everything that stems from that is called a supporting belief. So what you're talking about, imagine it being a tree, right? And you're just going after the supporting beliefs. You're just trimming the branches, the foliage, right? But now if you go
I'm laughing because I say this with respect to virology all the time. When people are talking about like vaccines and masks, I'm like, you're just trimming the branches. You're not getting to the root that there's no viruses.
It's perfect, man. And then you start to understand, if you literally go in with a hacksaw and you just rip that, you know, you get a system in place where you're pulling that out. Guess what? You have more bandwidth. You have more light specifically. And I always equate, if you're walking through the trauma forest and it's dark outside, you need a flashlight. So when you pull out these trees, these core beliefs, specifically through this practicum, you have more light to see the other things that are going to come back up too. Right. So you have more bandwidth to see, you have more light to see what other things need to be worked on. And it's super, super fascinating to constantly see this process, because when you see these imprints completely ripped, that programming completely changes, because we do an integration technique to literally integrate that within your being, because you need to massage programming. It's just synaptic pruning and synaptic massaging. You need to make sure that that's hardwired within the being so it can now start to show up in space. But yeah, what you're saying is perfect.
Okay. Yeah. That analogy that you just gave is so perfect. And I picture, like, we lived in this house when we were stationed in Oklahoma. Our neighbors were meth dealers, and I'm not even kidding. So we had this easement behind our fence that we had to cut, that we were like in charge of cutting, and our neighbors never ever cut theirs, right? So their weeds turned into like almost like mini trees.
Dude.
And when you looked at it at the top, it was just a bunch of gangly ass shit like intersecting, and you couldn't tell what there was. But when you looked at the bottom and started whacking at the bottom, there was just a few different roots that you had to cut. But at the top, it looked so convoluted and complex, you didn't know where to start. But if you just look at the bottom, it's just like, oh, I uproot this one. Oh, okay, that's all these little things that are sprouting about. And then I uproot this one, and this one, this one. That's all it was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, that's literally, it's almost like if you do the core work, then it's little maintenance. But if you don't do the core work, you're going to be out there with shears all the time. Yeah. Every season, being like, well, okay, what are you actually doing? And to me, that's a waste of energy, which is just built on our entire practice. We want to be energy efficient. So you can go back to the playground, man. This life should not be held hostage, especially by yourself. Like, that's not freedom. That's not sovereignty. Like, it's just not. You need to get the core cleaned out. You need to get it to a place where you can build upon that and help as many people as you can.
How does psychosomatics play into this? Because when I think of psychosomatics, I think of like moving your body in order to release the trauma, to get that out of your body. So how does that play into this uprooting the initial imprint?
Yeah, well, what you're talking about in essence is somatic healing. Like, that's when people are like convulsing and they're moving. That's what animals do naturally. Like, they don't have that same principle of metacognition like we do. So as soon as they're done with their stress state, they shake. They vigorously shake to get that stress, because stress in itself is just liquid energy. And as soon as you stop and you don't deal with it, it hardens that fascial tissue. And then the electrical current in your being, because that's all we are, is electricity, gets cut off. Right? That's why emotions are so important to understand. But when it really comes down to the notion of psychosomatics, whatever is indoctrinated specifically through the thought process has to show up in your somatic field. Right? So if you're constantly out here and you just like go out and do something and you firmly believe it, you're bypassing the analytical mind where it has to show up somatically. To me, through my research and my understanding and my experience, the body is subconscious. Right? So that's psycho. So you have the conscious, and then you have the analytical mind, and then the somatic aspect, psychosomatics, and then that portion is subconscious because it takes up more of your awareness. And it has been proven that 1,000 neurons per square inch of the body show up and hold these memories through the cellular structure of water in your cell membrane. It's beautiful, and it's also complex, but we do our best to take all these systems down into simplicity and refine it so we can teach it to kids. Right? Me and you get to talk on a different level because it's fun because you have that heightened sense of awareness, but we also want to refine it so this can be taught to children. They're just like,
yeah,
okay,
well,
I get it.
You know, that's why Dr. Cowan talks in analogies very simply, because a lot of adults really need it broken down like children, especially when it's new stuff like this. So
and we're all kids. Dude, we're all kids.
We're all kids.
Trying to that seriously, and we all been hurt. We've all had to go through it.
Yeah, I know. Break down or expand on the notion that that our bodies are actually our subconscious mind. Like that is the subconscious mind. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've always used these equations, like specifically in more analogies, but also examples. Like think of it this way. Like if you get up, right, and you're like, I want to take a shower. Where does your body go?
Your body goes to the shower.
Boom. Like, yeah, exactly. So it's like your mind is now the precursor to everything else that happens in action, and your body is the barometer to what action actually happens. So now it's the same thing. If you want coffee, where do you end up going? It's the same thing. It's like your body is a slave to the mind. So if you have sovereignty in the mind, your body will have autonomy. Right. So that in its essence is super, super important. And that's where I've gotten that notion where it really, truly understands. Like I also look at it this standpoint where I don't have to think about my blood moving. I don't have to think about digesting my food. I don't have to think about my heart. I don't have to think about it beating. I don't think I have to, the expression specifically of my lungs, I don't have to think of any of that.
Or when you get a cut, you don't have to think it.
Dude, that is the most fascinating thing. I was looking at my finger because I just torched it specifically when I was on a camping trip. And I was like, and that's what really got me started was the fascination of just healing. Like I was just like, how is this? I'm not doing anything. There's something more benevolent. There's something more beautiful. There's something more pure within me that's doing this for me. And that's when I just wanted to constantly tap into that. And to me, that's just my relationship with God.
Yeah. So our bodies, I'm trying to like piece all this together, right? So there's these natural mechanisms at play where our body, like we don't have, just like you said, we don't have to think about our heart beating. We don't have to think about our heart is not a pump. That's a story.
Oh yeah, totally. I get you, man.
Vortexing the blood, but yeah.
Don't get me started about the immune system.
Yeah, exactly. But so we don't have to think about any of those bodily processes though, and then so our body is the subconscious mind. So what is the mechanism at play that allows for all those things to naturally happen? And I guess how do we bridge the gap between whatever that is, our individual mind, and I know that's kind of a misnomer because there is actually no individual mind, but like individuated portion of the whole, I guess, right? For sure. With this subconscious body meat suit that we're walking around in. Like what is what in that diagram?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just understanding brain anatomy at that point. Like the brainstem and the cerebellum are going to be your two main drivers when it comes down to the autonomic nervous system. And then you have to start to look at the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis, and how that kicks in and out of alignment. We call it vertical and horizontal integration in our work. When you have anything tilted in and out of alignment with the limbic system from the neocortex, which is the thinking portion of the mind, there's a cascade of chemicals. And those chemicals are found in stress, and then once you have that out of alignment, then the body starts to take the toll. So that is like the gap. And I hopefully am understanding your question correctly, but like us.
Oh, it was a poorly worded question. I'm trying to
that's all good. Yeah. So for me, it's the reason why we utilize harmonization. There's a lot of definitions in the word harmonization, but the one that really resonates with me that I utilize in our work is consistency. It's the consistency, because without consistency, discipline, devotion, specifically with our desires, we don't have a chance. So us, it's being able to literally fully embody the integral aspects of our neocortex, which is the frontal lobe. It's over 40% of the volume of our entire brain, and how to correlate that in coherence, specifically with our brainstem, which starts the triggering point of the autonomic nervous system.
So,
and that to me is through meditation, visualization, which we teach people specific different types of techniques of conscious integration. And then you also have mental rehearsal. And there's a ton of studies out there that just show how powerful that is to show up specifically in your environment.
yeah. So I guess the program that you do, in summary, it's tailored towards the individual man or woman, obviously, but it's uprooting those imprints. It is then getting clear on what your desires are now that you've uprooted those programs, and you can actually begin to clearly look at what you want in life, and then setting on a path of consistency and devotion and discipline in order to attain those. And Kylie has talked to me about how you've shared it takes 66 days to actually form a habit. Can you talk about how that ties into what we're talking about with respect to devotion, consistency, and what your actual goals are?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the big question, right? How much do you love yourself? You know, the 66 days, that's a statistics. That's a study that was done in 2009 by the College of London that found that's how the neural pathway embeds itself to become a habit. So for me, I am an analytics guy. I love numbers. It was one of my first psychological associations to safety. I just see numbers differently than some people. I can't say most people because I haven't met a lot of people that can speak just in numbers like that from a vibrational frequency standpoint. But when it really comes down to this work in its essence is giving people the understanding of what you need to do from a subconscious and conscious level, because subconscious is built on habituation, which has to come from your conscious mind. The subconscious is impersonal. It doesn't care about you, doesn't care about your agenda, it's just there to record, process, and project. Like that's all it's. So now you have to fully develop your will, your mental faculties to work in harmony. That's why we utilize harmonization with both minds. So your analytics become even more powerful, because when you have a powerful analytical mind, you can do great things. But then when you put yourself into a conscious dynamic and you choose consistently, and devotion is just the emotional state of discipline. Like you're just like, I'm going to get up regardless if it sucks. I'm going to get up. I got a headache. I don't care. Right. And for me, that's where I kind of take my streets mentality, mix it with the spirituality and the science. It's like my 3S formula. So taking that tenacity, but also having tenderness, because you can't beat yourself up. I mean, we're going to make mistakes. I mean, nobody on this life is perfect. And we're going to, like, for me, perfection is progress. That's really what it is. So the conscious dynamics is super, super important. And that's what we utilize specifically in our programs here, is because I was working with an associate back in 2016, he had a sales representative that showed me a study that 4% of health programs are successful because they don't have an infrastructure of support, a hybrid approach, and accountability for that person to feel like they fucking matter. That means that most of these people out there, no offense, I'm sure there's plenty of people that can feel this, are doing programs just for monetary gain. They don't actually care about people. And that's where we differ from a lot of people. Is like, you come in and you're family to us. I always say this: if you're not willing to be my best friend, I don't want to work with you. I don't, because I'm like, I want that connection. I want you to feel safe so you can get this out and then you can go help and love your family.
I love that, man. Yeah. I think that's so important too, especially as the alternative side of health is becoming more popular.
True.
Of course, there's going to be a lot of people co-opting it to just make money. So it's really refreshing to hear that. But I want to talk now about the holonomic approach as it pertains to our thoughts creating our reality in psychoneuroimmunology.
Yeah.
First off, what is psychoneuroimmunology? That's a big word.
It's a fat one. So what is really cool about like our approach is like we got to be rooted in something that has measurements. We have metrics. Like the way that I love to work with people is that if you can put down your metrics and you can measure it, then you have something that's attainable, that you have something to shoot for, right? But for me, when it came down to really understanding what bioenergetics was, I was like, well, where is thought affecting anything if there is an immune system, right? So now if you go through this process of psychoneuroimmunology, psycho just being the thought portion of the mind, And then you have the neuro, which is the neurological function of immunology, which is how your thoughts affect the neurological function of your immune system. So that tells you,
You can
just
just
by
say
that.
how your thoughts affect your health, essentially,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Okay. That is the sexiest way of saying what you just said, right?
Yeah.
So how well can you think yourself into wellness? Can you
Mm.
think yourself into these things? And there has been plenty of studies, plenty of books out there that have proven this. Now it's just, can you start to understand the base foundation of what you desire? And then can you visualize it, right? And then what is the desired outcome and what's the end game? Right? What is the end game with that desire? Because we all move in cycles and we move in phases. So once you get to that desired outcome, start with that in the mind first. Have it in the mind, build it with your hands so you know it by heart. And there is so many old school languages and cultures out there where the heart is subconscious. And that's in the body. So there we start to understand how this stuff all ties into each other. And it's beautiful. Like, there is something so amazing about the mind, is because it's individual to us, but it's also collective to everybody else. That's where you get that transient connection where people can think about what you're thinking about.
Oh, for sure.
It's the most beautiful thing. We call it turtle box. Like, we just have a fun time specifically in our camp about, wow, this person's preemptively what I'm thinking. And that, when you have that connection, there's nothing more beautiful, in my opinion.
You know, it's an ironic thing that I've thought of quite a bit, because I always talk about how so many people today are just in a constant state of disassociation. So they're like out of their body. But it's ironic, because in order to tap into the extra senses that we have, you know, telepathy, being able to bend spoons, being able to read people's minds, being able to see into the past, into the future, et cetera, it requires that you are fully in your own body. So it's like an ironic thing that there's people who are so disassociative that they're not in their body, and you have to be in your body in order to project out of it to be able to have these other abilities.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for me to pick up on that, like, what is your number one force? Like, what's your number one force field? What is your currency? What is your electrical potential? Where does it start? And it's in your attention. Because nothing really comes into fruition until you put your attention on. And this entire 3D holographic universe is built on distraction. And it's doing that on purpose to keep you confused, keep you disassociated, just like you said, and keep you disconnected. Because they know if the masses connected with each other, be a different outcome happening on a lot of scales and a lot of different systems that are out in this world. So I really, really love what you're saying here, because if we just take that out of the equation, we just have a different reality. That's it. It's that simple. But it is so hard, because change work is the hardest work on the planet. To change your habits, to go back in time, to rewire yourself, and then create new habit structure, it is the hardest work. It is, by far.
Yeah. And what do you do with high vibe healing to help, like, keep the men and women who come to you accountable to make sure that change actually happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have like a built out hybrid system. So we have group coach. We also, and I never really resonated with the word coach, but it's just the best way to have, a relative term with people. I don't even resonate with the word trauma either. I like neurophysiological disassociation, because that's, in scientific terms, that's what it is. But to me, that's how we saw it. It was like, we have to have a hybrid approach. We have to have this weekly cohort where people can come and they can share. You have to have a one-to-one cohort, and then I have to be accessible, and I have to train, my team, so they actually get answers. And then you start to get it into the family. Like, when I work with people one-to-one, I'm like, I want you to be the example, because the principle of neuroscience is mirrored neurons. Every single thing you do and change and neurologically rewire, people that are closest to you, that love you, are going to see that, and they're like, oh shit.
Oh yeah, I've noticed a huge change in Kylie, dude. Yeah, I've noticed a huge change. She's a lot more calm. She's a lot more present. She's a lot less easily triggered. It's been incredible, man. And that, I mean, that's ultimately why I wanted to interview you, because of what I've seen change in Kylie.
Yeah. And that means a lot to me, because she's the product, she's literally the product. She's become the product. And when you do that, it's just like anything else, man. Like, it's not rocket science out here. If you pick something that you really resonate and you really want to do it, devote your life to it. I feel like everybody should have some form of healing schedule, and they find somebody they resonate with and just work with them, and allow yourself to surrender to that facilitation, so you can clean up house, so you can become a better person. That's it.
So when we, how do I word this? When we uproot that initial imprint, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be triggered by things anymore, right? Because
Very
like
true.
uprooting
Yeah.
the imprint, there's still some remnants of it left to
Yeah.
some degree, right? So what does that look like working through triggers? What do you teach about that?
Yeah, so the triggers are just the signaling. Those are the signaling molecules. So the holonomic brain theory, because I know this kind of reverts back to initial question. Holonomic brain theory just says in physics, if there's any shard, any fragment, any sliver, any bit or piece of the emotional sensation or feeling experience from something that's happened, that's deemed traumatic, that's left within the system, holographically, it represents the whole. That is a mouthful for people. I get it. I understand.
Break it down simply.
Yeah, but that just says if you have any tiny remnant, like you were said, any type of fragment that's still in there, that is still representing what happened. So that's why these reduction techniques don't work efficiently, because they're not taking care of the program. They're chipping away at the emotional wall that's being built specifically from the
based on the program. Yeah.
Yep. So once we literally remove, and this is what I call synaptic pruning. That's essentially what it's called in neuroscience. Once we remove the synapse that's connected to the program, then we have to massage in new imprinting. We have to, because that way any debris that's left over, we go through reassurance techniques through body scanning and just clean the entire system. And then what are we massaging through the vertebrae, through the spinal cord and the cerebral spinal fluid? What are you telling yourself that you can vibrationally resonate with?
Yeah. So what does that look like in application, right? So you basically creating new neural pathways at that point, or taking these old formed pathways and massaging them into new ones. But I would assume it's more than just saying mantras to yourself, like I'm loved.
Yeah.
So what does that look like?
Totally.
Though?
So I work within the two governing laws of consciousness, because the neocortex, the thinking mind, is repetition, because your life is comprised of what you do and what you don't do.
Yeah.
But the association, which is the second law, which is subconscious, that's the sensory field. The law of association says, well, if I associate things with my repetition, I ingrain the emotional landscape into my body, which is subconscious. So now we create out a plan of conscious integration, whether that's mental rehearsal, whether that's creative visualization, and we do what we call perceptual framing. What does this new perceptual frame that you built through that new memory configuration mean to you? And then how do you want to get up from this session, or how do you want to get up from this practicum and move through your existence, right? And it's the simple process of just being like, how much do you love yourself, right? Mm-hmm. We just give you a simple technique of how do you build that into, because I know you're a huge fan of Qigong, right? Oh, yeah. So, and then that's just building it into your flow to prime yourself, because people like myself that work with really heavily traumatized people that have gone through Lord knows what, is you have to prime yourself in the morning, because if I'm not at my best energy, y'all will pick up on that. You know, like my barometer of energy has to be up here, because everybody coming in here gets healing. You're getting something of me that's going to be transferred to you. So for me, that's why I always break down through systems. What does your morning look like? What does your power down look like? And that starts to prime the mitochondria for rest, regeneration, and production, because we're all energy. Everybody knows that at this point. If it's not energy producing, it's energy defending. And that's when you feel frozen. You feel like all clamped up and all tight. And dude, nobody wants to be around that type of energy. It doesn't matter how much of a good person you are. That stuff has to get out. So we prime people after the practicum for a conscious integration. And through repetition, if it's hardwired, through quantum physics and through neurological matrices, it will show up in the environment. And that in its essence is the law of consciousness.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I've been awful about it lately, just because I've been so focused on this project that I'm building at the end of COVID, and it's taking up so much of my time. But that being said, you can always freaking find time. So there's no excuse. Like first thing in the morning, I know that I do so much better when I start my day with movement. So for me, that looks like doing a lot of CrossFit type workouts and Olympic lifting, and then doing Qigong. If I just do that simple thing to start my day, hour and a half, I have such a better day. I have such a better day every single time. And it's like, it's this weird thing where I wake up though, and I'm like, at first I'm kind of like, fuck dude, I don't feel like doing this right now, especially because Kylie and I are in this habitual habit. And I think a lot of parents might know what we're talking about, where it's like, we finally get both of our kids to sleep by like 9:00, sometimes 9:30. We start the bedtime routine at like 7:45. finally they fall asleep at like 9:30. And it's like,
Right.
shit, this is the first time we've really had free time and we want to like hang out together. So then we end
Yeah.
up staying up till like 11:30. Then we look at each other and we're like, shit, we stayed up too late. So then when we
That's
wake
it.
up, we're like, fuck, dude, I'm tired. But it's like, if I just push through that initial feeling of tired and just fucking get up and do my morning routine,
It's so
I
worth
have
it.
such a better day.
It's so
But a
worth
lot of
it.
the times I skip it because I'm like, oh, I'm too fucking tired. But then
Right.
and it's okay if I do it once or twice, right? Like if I skip it
Yeah.
1 to 2 days in a row, fine. But if it's like 3 to 4 to 5 days, that's when I start feeling super stressed out. And then this weird thing happens where it's like, oh, I don't even want to do my morning routine because I'm already so off track now.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I
And
mean?
that I know exactly what you mean, because that's what we teach in our 6th requirement of change is commitment beyond your senses.
Yeah.
Because your senses are going to tell you all the stories
I'm
of why
tired,
you shouldn't
I'm this,
do
I'm
all.
that.
And that is, in my humble opinion, as a human being with the metacognition and the awareness skills that we've been given with our mental faculties, that is our duty to conquer ourselves so we get back into service. So, because that to me is so important. And this is the quote that I love from James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. You don't rise to your goal, you fall to the level of your systems. So your systems now need to become a higher standard. So you fall to that high standard. And that's what we ingrain and that's what we build within the structure. And like I said, devotion is the emotional state of discipline. And if you can ingrain that, discipline is the key. It really is. And if you can really get into that notion, plus with your focus, wherever your attention goes, your energy flows, collapsing that wave function within quantum physics, like the world becomes dope as fuck. It becomes so much fun too.
Yeah.
And we have a gang
As
of
it
fun
should be.
here. Yeah, exactly. We're all kids. We're all kids and we really can tap into it. And that's where you get into the inner child shadow work kind of stuff. We just bring in the neuroscience principles to just give you brass tacks. I'm like, but let's go get it done. Let's have some fun.
Let's have fun. Yeah, let's make this fun. Because I feel like in so many ways this can seem so daunting and so serious. And of course, people have been through some serious
exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, even I think obviously you can speak on this because you've been through a lot of trauma. And I've been through a shit ton of trauma. And like my audience knows that. And I completely agree. Like despite all that trauma that I've been through, like all of this should still be fun. This should be a fun experience that we're living in. Like, what's the point of doing all this? What's the point of so-called freedom fighting and educating people on all these things if we're not living and having fun?
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Because I mean, like, as we know it, like outside of what other, type of sciences or other people's experiences, as we know it, the identity that was given to us through our name, all we know is this is all we got. And then you start getting into existential foundations like, well, even if I do reincarnate or even if I do come back or even if, right? As me, as I know it, I'm not coming back the same way. So I always say this is one of the biggest things I tell people, that quote, like, go big or go home, right? Go big because you're going to end up going home. Just do it. Just do it. Have fun. Have a blast. Go big. Yeah.
Go big because you're going to end up going home. I like that.
Yeah, it's huge.
Okay, so one final question, then we'll see if anyone listening or watching has any questions. We might have covered quite a bit though, so I don't know if anyone will. But what is the cell danger response?
Yeah, so cell danger response, refined and renowned work by Dr. Robert Naveau. He's got a clinic in San Diego, and he found that through external threats and external factors, things like adverse childhood experiences, toxicity in the air, water, food supply, all these things, chemicals, vaccines, adjuvants, every single additives, fillers, all these things start to promote a wildly fascinating phenomenon that happens in the mitochondria. It starts to turn up, it starts to clamp up, and it starts to shell, almost kind of like a clam does.
Wow.
And when that happens, it doesn't express adenosine triphosphate, which is our energy molecule in cellular biology, and it turns into defense mode. And when you have defense mode, that is what we know as mitochondrial dysfunction. And that starts to shut off the energy production to the entire system. So for me, what we've done here at High Vibe Healing within that holonomic approach, taking the entire framework within those 7 dynamics, is hit everything: nutrition, hydration, gut health, adverse childhood experiences, and the other 6 traumas, and literally start hormesis, which is cellular regeneration, how to shock the mitochondria into a system to producing ATP. Positive stress, which sounds really ridiculous, but if you understand, Kelly Medull's work specifically on the upside of stress, you can literally change the perspective of what stress molecules do to you to have an advantageous effect from those stress. So we teach all these, we just don't leave anything unturned. We just can't. For me, when you take a whole approach, where are those systems that are affecting the cell danger response? Where are those CDRs being triggered? And that's what we call cleaning up your environment. And that is extremely helpful. So anything that you can talk about, from like, taking away polyunsaturated fatty acid oils, those are seed oils, down to eliminating blue light before you go to sleep. Like we cover it all. We cover it all.
Damn, that's awesome, man. Okay, I don't think I have any other questions. Is there anything on your heart or mind that you want to share?
No, man, this is just fun.
This is super fun.
Dude, I literally this is just like, I think this is how information should be, is like true deep connection, and just making it as potent and as potent and as efficient as possible, so we can all get back to our playgrounds. That's it.
Amen. This is one large playground for us all.
For sure.
Okay, so for those who are interested in Kyle's work in high vibe healing, please visit highvibehealing.info. Anything else you want to plug with what you're doing with high vibe healing, Kyle?
Yeah. I mean, outside of that, we have a new program, Conscious Dynamics, which is a 9-week like turn and burn kind of program starting on the 1st of June. That's going to be a pilot program. So if you guys are interested in really just changing your life really, really rapidly, quickly, what my goal is always is taking energy efficiency and matching society's need for gratification. Because if you can do it fast and you can do it efficiently and you can do it in a fun manner, your life can change in 2-3 months without even thinking about it. It's pretty fascinating. So that's about it.
Can people sign up for that after it launches, or is it only June 1st?
Yeah, so the 9 weeks is like literally what's super, super fascinating about this is that we've never done this before. That's the one beta program. So if anybody gets in contact with me, I can get them the details, but they can sign up beforehand. They can sign up on launch. They can sign up after launch. It's just six ones. We're just dropping that and we're going to have fun. It's just a 9-week turn and burn, like once a week. We're just going to go. And I just want to work with those people just to see who wants to go get it. Because I'm a go-getter, so I want to work with the go-getters. If they want to go 9 weeks, 66 days, let's see what you got, and let's have some fun.
Beautiful, awesome, cool. Man. Well, this was an amazing conversation. I'm super excited to begin working with you myself.
Yeah,
I know
Kylie
has gone on and on and on about how awesome so
that's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. I love it. Cool.
Awesome, brother. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for watching.
Problem. Thank you.